My people do not need promises. They need fields to feed their children and schools to shape their dreams. I am no hero, only a son of this soil, working to give my nation the dignity it deserves. On July 27, 2025, in the quiet heart of Oslo, Norway, a moment unfolded that would redefine the global conversation on peace. The Norwegian Nobel Committee, guardians of the world's most prestigious award, announced their shortlist for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Among the 5 names read aloud, one ignited a storm of awe, debate, and hope: Ibrahim Traoré, the century-year-old interim president of Burkina Faso. This was not just a nomination, it was a clarion call. A challenge to the very foundations of how the world perceives leadership, governance, and peace in the 21st century. Traoré, a soldier who seized power in a military coup in September 2022, stood not as a politician shaped by elite institutions or a diplomat polished by global summits, but as a man of the earth, a leader whose vision of peace was rooted in the sweat of farmers, the dreams of children, and the resilience of a nation long pushed to the margins. His name, spoken in the solemn halls of Oslo, sent ripples from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the corridors of power in Paris, Washington, and beyond, demanding a reckoning with the true meaning of peace in an era of fracture and uncertainty. The announcement was electric in the understated elegance of the Nobel Institute. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised, as the committee chair pronounced Traoré's name. Diplomats exchanged glances, their hushed whispers colliding with the weight of history. A young African leader, barely into his 4th decade, from one of the world's poorest nations, now stood among contenders whose legacies were etched alongside those of Nelson Mandela, Malala Yousafzai, and Martin Luther King Jr. Traoré's journey from a village boy to a global symbol was a testament to the power of conviction over convention, action over rhetoric, and hope over despair. This is the epic story of Ibrahim Traoré, the farmer in uniform who turned battlegrounds into farmlands, despair into dignity, and a nation's struggle into a beacon for the world. Born in 1988 in a small village in Burkina Faso, landlocked country in the arid Sahel of West Africa, Traoré's childhood was shaped by relentless poverty. The sun beat down on cracked earth, electricity was rare, and hunger was a constant companion. Yet within this crucible of hardship, his spirit was forged. His parents, subsistence farmers who wrestled life from unforgiving soil, instilled in him both a reverence for the land and a fierce sense of duty. "The earth is our mother," his mother would say, her hands calloused from years of toil. "Treat her with respect, and she will provide." Those words became the bedrock of his life, shaping a boy who saw not limitations, but possibilities in the dust beneath his feet. The military became his path to opportunity. In a country where education was a luxury, the army offered structure, discipline, and a chance to rise. He joined not for power, but for purpose, driven by a desire to serve a nation he saw slipping into chaos. By his early 30s, Traoré had earned a reputation as a captain of unwavering integrity, respected by his soldiers for fairness and by his superiors for resolve. But as he climbed the ranks, he watched his nation unravel. Faso was bleeding. Insurgent groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State ravaged the north and east, displacing over 2 million people and leaving trails of death and destruction. The government, under President Rochmark Christian Kabore, seemed powerless, unable to halt the violence or address the deeper wounds of poverty, corruption, and exploitation by foreign powers. By September 2022, the crisis was unbearable. Multinational corporations controlled vast stretches of farmland, exporting profits while locals starved. Foreign aid, often laden with exploitative conditions, offered no real salvation. For Traoré and a cadre of young officers, the breaking point came on September 29, 2022. They staged a bloodless coup, removing Kabore and naming Traoré interim president at just 34 years old. The world recoiled. Military coups were seen as an affront to democracy, relics of a darker era. The African Union suspended Burkina Faso's membership. Western capitals issued stern condemnations, but Traoré stood firm. In his first address to the nation, wearing a simple military uniform, spoke not of conquest, but of creation. "We did not come to rule," he declared, his voice steady as the Sahel winds. "Came to rebuild." Those raw, unadorned words marked the dawn of a revolution unlike any other revolution, not of ideology or power, but of labor, unity, and truth. His vision for Burkina Faso was as audacious as it was elemental. Peace through self-reliance. In an age of hollow promises and performative diplomacy, he embraced the ancient virtues of work, sacrifice, and community. His battlefield was not the war-torn north, but the hunger that plagued villages, the ignorance that dimmed young minds, and the despair that crushed the human spirit. His weapons were not guns, but schools, clinics, and seeds. Within months, Traore unleashed reforms that would transform Burkina Faso and send shockwaves across Africa and beyond. The insurgency was his first challenge. Rather than fueling the cycle of violence, he chose radical reconciliation. Over 12,000 former militants, men and women who had once fought under banners of terror, were reintegrated into society through community dialogues, vocational training, and resettlement programs. Traore worked closely with local leaders, village elders, religious figures, community organizers, to create spaces where former fighters could lay down weapons and take up tools. From carpenters to farmers, from artisans to traders, many emerged from the ashes of conflict, ready to build rather than destroy. Pardoning 1,100 former militants and enrolling them in the Farmers of Peace program. Hailed by the United Nations as a model for post-conflict reconciliation, the initiative turned battlegrounds along the Nodnon River into fertile farmland. Men who once manned checkpoints now operated irrigation pumps, their overalls emblazoned. With the words "Farmers of Peace," the impact was staggering. Terror attacks dropped by 70%. Communities once divided by fear began to heal. In Kaya, a former militant named Musa Zongo captured the sentiment, "I fought because I had nothing. Traore gave me a purpose, a field, a future, a home. It was not without risk." Reconciliation demanded trust in a nation scarred by betrayal, and courage in a region where vengeance was the norm. But Traore's conviction was unshakable. "These are not enemies," he said. "They are our brothers and sisters, led astray by despair. Our duty is to bring them back to the light." His boldest economic move came with the reclamation of 3.88 million hectares of farmland from foreign corporations. For decades, multinational agribusinesses had exploited Burkina Faso's fertile plains, exporting wealth while local farmers languished in poverty. In a single, defiant stroke, Traore's government nationalized key agricultural assets and redistributed the land to smallholder farmers. "The land is not for sale," he declared, echoing the revolutionary spirit of Thomas Sankara. "It belongs to those who work it, who love it, who live by it." The ripple effects were immediate. Empowered with land, seeds, and tools, farmers began cultivating maize, sorghum, and millet, revitalizing rural economies. Markets overflowed with locally grown produce. Food insecurity, once a daily reality, began to fade. The move also struck a blow against dependence on foreign aid, signaling that Burkina Faso would chart its own course. In Pasella, farmer Fatoumata Ouedraogo described the change. "Before Traore, we were tenants on our own land, begging for scraps. Now we grow our own food, and our children no longer go to bed hungry. For many, this was more than policy. It was a cultural and spiritual rebirth. In Goram, market vendor Asa Diallo said, "When Traore gave us back the land, he gave us back our pride. We are no longer beggars, we are builders." His vision soon expanded beyond Burkina Faso. The Sahel, plagued by desertification and climate change, became the stage for one of his most ambitious initiatives, the Sahel Life Alliance. In partnership with Mali and Niger, Traore led a coalition to plant 800 million trees across the arid region, turning barren wastelands into green corridors of hope. The project created thousands of jobs, restored degraded ecosystems, and fostered solidarity among nations long divided by conflict and scarcity. Environmentalists hailed it as a triumph of climate justice. Scientists marveled at its scale, noting its ability to slow desertification and combat climate change. In Tatao, women who once walked miles for firewood now tended saplings, nurturing life where only dust had reigned. "We are not just planting trees," Traore said. "We're planting the seeds of a future where our children can breathe, where our land can live." The alliance was also a diplomatic breakthrough, replacing decades of foreign exploitation with regional unity. Even skeptical Western leaders acknowledged its significance. As one unclimate official put it, the Sahel Life Alliance reminds us that solutions to global challenges can come from the least expected places. For Traore, it was simple. A nation without a healthy environment is a nation without a future. We are fighting for our lives. He understood that peace was not merely the absence of war, but the presence of opportunity, dignity, and hope. His government slashed bureaucratic spending by 60%, channeling the savings into education and healthcare. In just 18 months, Burkina Faso built 2,400 new schools and 700 healthcare centers, a feat that stunned the region and drew praise from development experts worldwide. Classrooms sprang up where children had once studied under trees, their lessons cut short by rain or heat. Clinics delivered life-saving care to communities long forgotten, their shelves stocked with medicine and their doors open to all. Traore also prioritized nutrition. He ensured that 95% of rural primary school children received free lunches made from locally grown food, boosting attendance, improving performance, and supporting local farmers. In Banfara, teacher Aminata Konat described the transformation. "My students used to come to school with empty stomachs, their eyes dull with hunger. Now they eat, they laugh, they dream." Traore has given them a reason to hope. The program created a virtuous cycle, strengthening both education and agriculture. Healthcare, too, saw unprecedented progress. Maternal mortality rates fell sharply, and preventable diseases such as malaria became far less deadly as newly built clinics reached even the most remote areas. In the village of Nuna, a mother named Fatou Mata Dio spoke of the transformation. "I used to pray my children would survive the night. Now I take them to a clinic just down the road, and I know they will live." The speed and scale of these reforms were staggering, a living testament to Traore's ability to turn vision into action. "We are not building for awards," he said. "We're building for our people, for their dignity, for their future." Perhaps his most visionary initiative came in May 2025 with the launch of the Farmers of Peace program. By pardoning 1,100 former militants and integrating them into agricultural communities, he transformed the very agents of conflict into architects of renewal. The program provided training, tools, and land, enabling these men and women to become productive citizens. In villages across Burkina Faso, people who once carried rifles now carried hoes, their hands irrigating fields and rebuilding trust. The United Nations hailed the program as a global model. A senior UN official declared, "Traore has shown the world that peace is not won with weapons, but with opportunity." The impact of the initiative reached far beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali and Niger, similar programs began to take root, inspired by Traore's success. In the town of Gibo, a former militant named Issouf Kampore described his transformation. "I fought because I had no hope. Traore gave me a field, a purpose, a family. Now I fight for peace." The Farmers of Peace program was not simply about rehabilitation. It was about redefining what it means to be a citizen, to belong to a community, to contribute to the nation's future. Every seedling planted in those fields bore a small tag with the words Liberté, Travail, Dignit, encapsulating Traore's vision. On July 1st, 2025, during the Feast of All Saints, an unexpected voice joined the chorus of praise for Traore. Pope Leo XI, a pontiff renowned for his unwavering commitment to social justice. From the heart of the Vatican, he spoke words that carried the weight of centuries. "When I pray for peace," the Pope said, "I see the face of a young soldier from Burkina Faso. He does not preach through laws or scriptures, but through the toil of his hands and the compassion of his heart. He has never walked the churches of Rome, yet he treats the world's poor as his sanctuary." The Vatican's formal nomination of Traore for the Nobel Peace Prize was a historic moment, unprecedented in its audacity. Never before had the Holy See endorsed a sitting African leader, let alone one who had risen through a military coup. The endorsement framed his leadership as both a moral and spiritual crusade. Challenging the world's obsession with power and prestige, it shifted global discourse from abstract diplomatic rhetoric to the tangible reality of peace built through action. In Rome, the Pope's words were met with both reverence and debate, with some Vatican scholars calling it a redefinition of redemption for a leader born from conflict. The papal endorsement sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. In Paris, President Annelousi Merritt, still navigating France's complex colonial legacy, offered measured praise. "We may not agree with Mr. Traoré's methods, but his results demand our respect. He is writing a new chapter in Africa's story, one of action rather than promises." In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Janet R. Collins was more cautious. "Traoré's work prompts us to rethink what peace means in the 21st century." Brazil's President Luiz G. Costa was unreserved. "He is the new Sankara, a farmer in uniform who plants hope where others sow division." In Moscow, the Russian president praised his pragmatism. "He builds not ideologies but systems. Food, schools, belief." The Vatican's endorsement was more than symbolic. It was a call for the world to recognize a new kind of leadership. A soldier who had never set foot in the great cathedrals of Europe was now being hailed as a moral force, a man whose deeds spoke louder than any sermon. The recognition elevated him from a regional figure to a global symbol, forcing the world to question its assumptions about power, redemption, and the meaning of peace in a century defined by crisis. In Burkina Faso, news of Traoré's Nobel nomination unleashed a tidal wave of pride and celebration. In Ouagadougou, tens of thousands gathered beneath the glow of handmade lanterns, their voices rising in a chorus of Ibrahim, Ibrahim. Street vendors sold cups of bissap and roasted peanuts, while drummers pounded rhythms older than the colonial statues still standing in the city. A hand-painted banner stretched between two acacia trees read, "We no longer beg. The world now listens." Radio stations crackled with callers shouting, "Sacre victoire," a cry of triumph echoing through the night. Mothers wept openly, not from sorrow, but from the relief of knowing their children now attended schools Traoré had built, safe from the gunfire that once haunted their dreams. The celebrations were not confined to Burkina Faso. Across the Sahel, in Niamey and Bamako youth collectives projected videos of Traoré onto public walls, chanting "One Sahel, One Dream" in Lagos. A student activist tweeted, "Traoré didn't chase awards in Davos. He chased harvests in the fields. That's why this Nobel matters." In Johannesburg, university students organized an art exhibit titled "Fields of Peace," showcasing paintings, installations, and poetry inspired by his agricultural revolution. Pan-African media called the nomination a reckoning, a rejection of the old global order, and a bold redefinition of Africa's place in the world. In villages along the Nadian River, former militants now clad in overalls labeled Farmers of Peace worked alongside locals, irrigating maize fields and rebuilding trust. In the town of Dori, a mother named Asa Sowadogo spoke for many. "My son used to fear the night. Now he sleeps soundly, knowing there are schools to go to and fields to tend." The nomination was more than an accolade. It was a validation of a people's resilience, a recognition that a nation once dismissed as a footnote could lead the world in redefining peace. The celebrations ignited a Pan-African movement. In Accra, students held candlelight vigils, discussing Traoré's model of self-reliance. In Kinshasa, youth collectives hosted forums debating how his reforms could inspire their own countries. On social media, #hashtag Nobel for Africa trended worldwide as young Africans demanded recognition for leaders who work the land rather than the lecture circuit. In Nairobi, a journalist wrote, "Traoré has shown us that peace is not a gift. From the West, it is a harvest we grow ourselves." On July 28, 2025, Just one day after the Nobel announcement, the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood together in Ouagadougou for a historic press conference. Their joint declaration was both defiant and hopeful, framing the nomination not as the glory of one man, but as the triumph of an entire continent. They announced the creation of the Joint Civil Command of the Sahel, a new institution to coordinate regional efforts in food security, post-conflict, resettlement, and rural healthcare. It was a bold statement of intent. Africa would no longer be defined by the narratives of others, but by the actions of its own people. Neighboring nations such as Guinea, Chad, and Togo sent official congratulations, signaling that Traoré's model of self-reliance and regional solidarity could become a blueprint for African development. Within the African Union, the nomination sparked fierce debate. Some delegates questioned the policy of isolating governments born of military coups. One commissioner, speaking anonymously, said, "We cannot judge leaders by how they rise to power. We must judge them by the roads, schools, and clinics they build." The discussion reached its peak when several AU members called for a revision of the rapid response mechanism, arguing that Traoré's results demanded a new approach to governance. Even in Europe and the United States, diplomats began to acknowledge his growing legitimacy. While concerns over democratic norms persisted, some envoys expressed respect for Burkina Faso's sovereign path. Quietly, certain international lenders reopened communication channels with Ouagadougou, a stark reversal from months earlier. When Traoré had cut ties with the IMF, this was a tacit admission. His model, rejecting foreign debt, nationalizing resources, and prioritizing local solutions, was not just viable, but transformative. Nomination was more than a personal honor. It was a mirror held up to the world's contradictions. For too long, Africa had been treated as a chessboard for foreign interests. Its resources plundered, its people patronized. Traoré turned that chessboard into a canvas for self-determination. His rejection of IMF loans, his nationalization of food policy, and his ban on foreign mining companies posed a quiet but profound challenge to the global economic order. Yet the results were undeniable. Terror attacks down, farm yields up, clinics open, children fed. In villages across Burkina Faso, neighbors once divided by ethnicity now planted saplings together, each tagged with the words "Liberté, Dignité." The nomination forced the world to grapple with a fundamental question. What is peace in an age of climate crisis, economic inequality, and geopolitical tension? Is it merely the absence of war, or is it the presence of justice, opportunity, and self-reliance? Traoré, a farmer in uniform, showed that true power lies not in armies or wealth, but in the hands of those who till the soil, teach the young, and heal the sick. His story is a call to redefine leadership, not as the product of elite credentials or global approval, but as a commitment to the common good. The global reaction was a mix of admiration and unease. In France, Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler, President, and Lucie Moret's cautious praise reflected a nation wrestling with its history. Traoré's methods may unsettle us, she said, but his achievements compel us to listen. In the United States, Secretary of State Janet R. Collins called it an opportunity to rethink peace, her words masking discomfort with his rejection of Western economic models. Brazil's President Luiz G. Costa was more personal. When I compared him to Sankara, he corrected me. "I'm no hero, just a man who works the land." That's when I knew he deserved the Nobel. In Moscow, the Russian president praised his pragmatism once again. He builds not ideologies, but systems, food, education, hope. These were not just compliments. They reflected a shifting geopolitical reality. For decades, Africa had been a battleground for foreign powers. Traoré turned that battleground into farmland, classrooms, and clinics, forcing even his critics to acknowledge his impact. His nomination marked a turning point, a declaration that Africa was no longer speaking with borrowed voices, but with the strength of its own actions. As December 10th, 2025 approaches, the world waits to see whether Ibrahim Traoré will become the first sitting African head of state to win the Nobel Peace Prize and the first leader honored Despite rising through a military transition, some call it practical peace. Peace not negotiated in luxury hotels, but sown in fields, built in schools, and nurtured in communities. Yet the outcome in Oslo is almost secondary to the transformation he has already sparked. As night falls, the city refuses to sleep. The chants of Ibrahim Traoré echo through the streets, carried by the beat of drums and the pulse of a nation reborn. Vendors sell bisep and roasted peanuts, their smiles as bright as the lanterns overhead. A banner stretched between two acacia trees reads, "We no longer beg. Now the world comes to us." Across the Sahel, youth collectives project Traoré's speeches onto public walls, their voices united in a single dream. In Lagos, Accra, and Kinshasa, students hold forums and vigils, their hashtags trending worldwide as they demand recognition for a leader who works the land instead of the lecture circuit. Whatever happens in Oslo, one truth is already certain. Ibrahim Traoré has won the hearts of his people, the respect of his continent, and the attention of a world that can no longer ignore the power of peace, rooted in justice, dignity, and the land. His story is not merely a candidacy for a prize, it is a mirror to the contradictions of our time. A reminder that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of hope, planted one seed at a time.